It was a quiet Sunday afternoon on the outskirts of a small farming town in Iowa when 90-year-old twin sisters Lily and Emma vanished without a trace. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, painting the fields gold as the girls giggled and ran through the tall grass, playing hide-and-seek near the barn. Their mom, Sarah, was finishing up evening chores, thinking the girls would be back inside any minute. But as the minutes stretched into hours and the sky turned black, a chilling realization set in something was terribly wrong. The entire community came together, combing through fields, woods, and even the nearby river. Drones, dogs, volunteers. Everyone searched, but there were no signs, no footprints, no dropped toys. It was as if the twins had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. Rumors swirled. Some blamed wild animals. Others whispered about strangers passing through. But Sarah refused to believe her girls were gone forever. Deep down, she felt they were still close. Somewhere then, exactly 2 months later, while moving hay in the old barn, Sarah noticed something strange under one of the bales, something that made her heart stop. It was small, familiar, and definitely didn't belong there. What she discovered would shock not only her, but the entire town, reopening the mystery with even more questions than answers. What really happened to Lily and Emma that evening? And why had no one looked under that hay bale sooner? Sarah slowly pulled back the loose strands of hay, her hands shaking. Tucked beneath the bale was one of Lily's pink sneakers, muddy, scuffed, and unmistakably hers. It didn't make sense. That spot had been checked before, more than once. The barn had been searched top to bottom in the first week the girls went missing. But somehow, this had gone unnoticed. Or had it been moved there later? Her mind raced. Why would the shoe turn up now, 2 months later? And why here, in their own barn? The discovery reignited everything's fear, confusion, and that quiet hope she had fought to hold on to. She called the sheriff right away, and within hours, the farm was swarming again. Officers questioned her and her husband, combed the property again, and re-interviewed neighbors who had already given statements. But nothing new surfaced, just that one small shoe and 100 more questions. The twins had always been adventurous, full of energy and curiosity. They knew every corner of the farm like the back of their hand. The hayloft had been their favorite place to play, sometimes even nap during long summer afternoons. But on the day they disappeared, everything had seemed normal. No arguments, no unusual visitors, no signs of trouble. How could they have just vanished in broad daylight? The more Sarah thought about it, the more she wondered, was this just a tragic accident that had been missed? Or was someone hiding something much darker right under their noses? As word spread about the found sneaker, old doubts and fresh suspicions stirred across the small town. Some neighbors began to wonder if the family knew more than they were letting on. Others pointed fingers at the farmhand, Jake, a quiet young man who had worked for the family for years but kept mostly to himself. He had been there that day, fixing a fence not far from the barn, though he had helped in the early searches. People started asking why he hadn't seen or heard anything. Sarah, meanwhile, couldn't sleep. She kept replaying every moment of that day in her head, the way Lily had asked for just 5 more minutes to play, how Emma had laughed and darted behind the barn. There was nothing unusual, no signs of danger. But now, with the shoe showing up so close to home, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching them. Maybe still was. The sheriff's office opened the case again with fresh eyes. Bringing in a new detective from the state, she began asking hard questions, digging into the family's past, interviewing distant relatives, and even checking nearby security cameras from farms miles away. A few strange pieces of information started to surface. One neighbor recalled hearing a truck late at night the week after the girls vanished. Another mentioned seeing a light in the hayloft days after the searches had ended. If the twins had left on their own, they would have come back. But if they didn't, who was keeping them away? The detective, Claire, started noticing patterns others had missed. The truck sighting, the unusual lights. The fact that Jake had taken a sudden 2-day trip right after the girls disappeared, something he hadn't mentioned in his original statement. When asked again, he said he'd gone to visit his sick uncle in a nearby town, but couldn't provide any proof. No one there remembered seeing him. Still, there was no hard evidence, just a growing cloud of suspicion. Meanwhile, Sarah began finding small things around the farm that didn't belong. A hair ribbon on the fence. A paper heart tucked inside an old feed bin with the girl's handwriting. These weren't there before. They felt fresh placed recently. And if that was true, it could mean one terrifying thing. The girls were still. Nearby, late one night, Sarah thought she heard whispering in the barn. Grabbing a flashlight, she crept through the cool darkness, calling out softly. Nothing. But in the silence, she noticed something new: scratches on the inside of one of the wooden walls, low to the ground. Letters, names, Lily and Emma. Her heart pounded. Someone had been there. Recently, the detective brought in dogs again, this time trained to search for live scent. They zeroed in on the barn, then the cornfield behind it. That's when Claire found a hidden hatch buried beneath old boards and straw, sealed tight. Locked from the outside, everyone froze. The air was thick with fear, hope, and one unspoken question: what was inside? Claire called for backup, her voice low and tense as she stood over the hidden hatch. Sarah clutched her chest, barely breathing, convinced that after 2 unbearable months, they were finally about to find out what had happened to her daughters. But when the officers pried open the hatch and shined a light inside, they didn't find Lily and Emma. Instead, there was a narrow tunnel leading underground, dusty, dark, and strangely well constructed. Someone had built this deliberately. It ran beneath the barn and disappeared into the earth. The search team descended carefully, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Along the walls were scraps of fabric, small footprints in the dirt, even a crayon drawing taped to a wooden beam. It showed 2 girls holding hands, a sun overhead, and a barn in the distance. Claire's stomach sank. Someone had kept them down here. But who and why? As the tunnel twisted deeper, the team found a side room carved into the dirt. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, a lantern, empty food wrappers, and a child's book open to the middle. Everything suggested the girls had been alive and living here, but the space had clearly been abandoned days, maybe even hours earlier. It was to clean? Then, just as Claire turned to leave, her flashlight hit something in the corner: a set of muddy boot prints. Large ones, leading out the opposite way. Someone had been down there. And they'd taken the girls with them again. Only this time, they were one step ahead. The chase began before sunrise. With the trail fresh and the boot prints leading through the cornfield, Claire and her team moved quickly. Drones were launched overhead while officers spread out on foot. Sarah stayed behind, pacing the barn, clutching the drawing they'd found in the tunnel. Every second felt like a lifetime. Just past the edge of the woods, about a mile from the farm, one of the dogs started barking wildly. Beneath a thick patch of brush covered with a tarp and fallen leaves was a small, makeshift shelter. Inside, curled up together, dirty, thin, but alive, were Lily and Emma. Tears flooded Sarah's face as she ran toward them, falling to her knees as the girls leaped into her arms. They were scared but unharmed, clinging tightly to their mom and crying softly. Paramedics checked them over while the sheriff's team secured the scene. It felt like a miracle. But the man who had taken them, he was gone. Hours later, just when everyone thought it was over, Claire returned to the tunnel. Something about it still didn't sit right. She followed the second set of prints, deeper into the connected underground space they hadn't finished exploring. There, behind a false wall, she found a small room filled with photos, notes, and recordings, evidence that the girls had been watched for months. The final twist? Among the items, a framed photo of Sarah and her daughters, taken from inside their own home. The person behind it all hadn't been a stranger. They had been close all along. In the days that followed, the truth began to unfold. The man behind the abduction was a former friend of the family, distant cousin who had once lived nearby and drifted out of contact years ago. He had quietly returned, obsessed with the twins and convinced they were safer with him. Using old knowledge of the farm, he built the tunnel and watched them from afar, waiting for the right moment. He knew the land, the routines, and how to avoid being seen. That's why the girls were taken so silently, and why no one had suspected him. Authorities tracked him down in a remote cabin 2 towns over. He was arrested without a fight, and the evidence recovered from the tunnels sealed the case. The girls were shaken. They slowly began to heal, surrounded by love, therapy, and the safety of their home once more. The community, once filled with fear and suspicion, came together to support the family. Jake, the farmhand who had fallen under suspicion early on, was cleared and later praised for his help in the final search efforts.